For our COBT listeners and viewers, it's Maynard, Mike, and Robbie here with something super special. We're talking today to an author, David Hambling. He's the author of Swarm Troopers, How Small Drones Will Conquer the World. He's a freelance journalist based in South London. He's written for the New Scientist magazine, one of my favorites, Popular Mechanics, Forbes, The Economist, The Guardian, and others. He's originally educated in physics at the University of Bristol. And he's a good friend of Rob West. Rob connected us. We told Rob we really want to understand the latest with drones, and Rob said, you got to talk to David Hambling. So David, thank you so much for joining us. We've all read the book and are excited to talk to you today.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Clearly, the drones are very much in the news now.
That's right. Well, Mike, before we jump in with David and talk about drones and all the things you can do with drones, what would you tell us about the screen today?
Well, I'd say the screen is a little bit green. I mean, if you think about it, one of the things we've been talking about for the last 4 or 5 weeks is Trumpatility. And I would say over the last 3 or 4 days, Trumpatility has been a little bit less volatile. And so, we were talking the last couple of weeks, the VIX went to all-time or close to all-time highs in the last 2 weeks. We're now still high, but we're down significantly from where we were just a week ago. We've been cutting the VIX in half. And so markets have stabilized, at least temporarily. S&P is up a little bit here over the last week or so. The interesting thing, I had to look at year to date. I mean, it feels like we're down 30%, right? The S&P is down 7% for the year. Dow Jones Industrials is down about 5% for the year. It does not feel like that. And so, just kind of level set where we are. Yeah, so that's a little bit about the domestic equity markets. Now, the really interesting development was in the international equity markets. Last Friday, Argentina got a $20 billion loan from the IMF. And so this is really, really positive for the economy. It's really important for the country. What they're going to do now is they're going to let their currency float. I think it's something like 1,100 to 1,400 pesos to the dollar beginning this week. On Monday it started. The peso moved into that range. What we also saw was bonds, sovereign bonds went down about 150 basis points on the yield side there. So that's reacting positively. And the stock market, it was up around 6 or 7% as well. Some of the big names there like YPF, Vistra, that are basically Argentinian companies, they were up anywhere from 10 to 15%. So really positive development. For Argentina. And guess what? We'll see where they go from here. But I mean, they may be on the road to recovery. And what that means is there could be investment in this country, be it oil majors, be it other companies. This is a very positive development. We'll see how that plays out over the next couple of weeks, months, and years. I'd say the second thing I'd talk about is crude oil. Obviously, a lot of issues with crude oil. The IEA came out today. OPEC came out yesterday. They lowered their growth assumptions for 2025 and 2026. I'd say, from around 1 million barrels a day in 2025 and 2026 to around 700,000 barrels a day for 25 and 26. Goldman Sachs put out a report the other day that basically says the market's going to be about 800,000 barrels in surplus in 25 and potentially 1.4 million barrels in surplus in 2026. That is a terrible setup for crude oil. We're in the low 60s right now. If that indeed does come true, we're not saying that's the case, then oil's probably has got a ceiling above it right now. And the floor, do not want to say that, but it could probably have a 5 handle. So it's something we're thinking about. But bottom line is that is very consensus to be bearish crude oil. So we're trying to find some things to be positive on crude oil. The last thing we'd say is here that oil service earnings are going to be kicking into high gear this week and next week. Liberty Pro is going to basically be reporting on Wednesday, conference call on Thursday. Halliburton is going to be next Tuesday, and Schlumberger, SLB, however you want to call it, is going to be reporting next Friday. So I think what you're going to hear there is that E&Ps, managements in general, we're looking for probably flat activity in the first half of this year and maybe a little bit more activity in the second half of the year, and pricing, at least from an oil service standpoint, being similar, but maybe a little bit of uptick in the second half of 2025. That's probably not going to happen. I think you'll be lucky to have activity count flat in the second half of the year if those numbers that I just talked about from Goldman happen. And pricing is probably not going to be up like a lot of people expect. It's probably going to be down. The only question is how much it's going to be down. So these calls this week and next week for oil service, a lot of people are going to be watching it. And so that's something we're going to be watching a lot for. But I'd say this already. Those stocks are down quite a bit. Consensus is very bearish, and so we're looking to see any optimism. We're looking to see if there's realism in those calls, but bottom line is they're going to be very important to sort of set the deck for the next quarter or so.
It's going to be fascinating, all those earnings calls and just seeing what everybody says about tariffs and et cetera. Robbie, anything you'd throw in before we jump in with David?
No, just excited to talk to David on the technology side. I mean, from our investments in new technologies we're seeing in the energy space, there's a lot of new technology around AI, adoption, new use cases in AI that's coming up. So,
well, David, again, thank you for joining us. Mike is our best student here. He usually finishes the book before the rest of us, but we've all read it, and we're all excited. We've learned so much about the drones and how they developed. The book takes you from really the earliest experimentation with drones, particularly in the military context, up through to today. The swarm aspect involves these smaller drones, and the book goes into a lot of the potential that these drones have, working together, being very small, being stationary in certain places, carrying with them explosive devices. The book is a litany of kind of everything you could do with a drone. What got you so excited about drones? What led you to write the book? And I assume since the book was written, there's a whole nother book on the latest developments that could be coming.
Absolutely. Well, in a sense, it started with my previous book, which was weapons grade. And that was a history of technology and looking at how technology has come from the military side. The military always get the good toys first, and then they share them with everyone else. So if you want to look at what our technology is going to look like in 10 years' time, look at what the military have now. So all these things, like the internet, came from DARPANET, which was a military development. Digital computers, in fact, came from World War II work on that. The microchip originated from, I think it was Texas Instruments work, designing control systems for rockets. So all sorts of things, all the high-tech stuff came from the military side. And then that was 2005. Just after I finished that, I noticed, though, that there was something interesting happening, and that the military was suddenly losing their lead, and that rather than having all the best toys, the military were looking enviously at what other people had. And the driving force behind this was the mobile phone revolution, because all of a sudden you had massive scale, millions of units, and that was driving the development of small, low power, low voltage electronics for doing all kinds of things, which included, in particular, navigation with miniature GPS cameras, processing, and little accelerometers. Now, those are actually all the things you need to fly a drone. Basically, if you just stick wings or rotors on a mobile phone, you've got a drone. And clearly this was leading to this new generation of very cheap, very capable little flying machines. And those were doing what the military had always wanted to do, which is just go and take a look at the other side of the hill. Now, they had drones that could do that, but they were like tens of thousands of dollars, and you don't want to use it because you might drop it. So suddenly there were all these hobbyists had drones that were the envy of the military. And this, obviously, even though people like the US Army were not allowed to use consumer drones, other people, like ISIS, were. And they did start using them on the battlefield, and they very rapidly found that they could strap a grenade to it and turn it into a weapon. And that then set me thinking on, so what are the implications of this? What happens when you've got this technology that's available to everyone, and that gives them a capability which is actually beyond what militaries have now? And then I've watched things develop since then. And you've now got a situation in Ukraine where something like 60 to 70% of Russian casualties are caused not by expensive high-tech weapons, not by the Javelin missiles and HIMARS. 2/3 of the casualties are caused by small drones, which means that the small drones on their own are doing twice as much as everything else put together. And obviously that's a massive turnaround in terms of technology. Now, the area that you might also be more interested in from an energy perspective is that both sides at the same time are fighting a long-range drone war. Rather than the sort of ballistic missiles we've seen in previous conflicts, for the long-range strategic strikes, for both the Russians and the Ukrainians, what they're using are small drones, and they're targeting each other's energy targets. And that perhaps is where our conversation starts.
You know, there's so many ways we could go with this. You do talk about the bigger drones, well, the development of drone technology, the bigger drones, the smaller drones, and then you give the perspective on what it's like to try to defend against these small drones. And it does seem, it's pretty intimidating to think about, I need to have some kind of defense that prevents a pretty small device from flying in, attaching to a highly strategic part of some building or bridge or whatever it is, and then exploding. And that device knows exactly where to land to cause the most damage. It's pretty intimidating when you think about trying to defend yourself against these things.
Yeah, and I think that it's the precision that really makes the difference here. Because even at the moment, these drones are mainly piloted by humans and they're remote controlled. In future, they won't be. But back in if I can take you back 80 years to 1944, and just about a quarter of a mile up the road here, we've got a couple of streets that were hit by German V1 doodlebugs. Now, you might say those are among the earliest attack drones, because the V1 was a pilotless aircraft developed by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. And they were developed because basically the Allies completely controlled the skies. There was no chance of any German bombers getting through. So they designed these little cheap one-way jet-powered aircraft, which just cost a few $1,000s each, and which could carry like about a 2,000-pound warhead and hit London. But the problem was that at the time, the guidance systems were very, very inaccurate. I mean, they refined the system, but by the end of the war, they were just about capable of landing within a circle 7 miles in diameter. So they could only hit a target the size of a city. Flash forward to 2025, and now everything has got, at the very least, GPS on it, and can narrow that down to within 5 or 10 yards. And that means you can hit an individual oil tank or an individual part of an electrical plant or a substation, and that even if you've got just a very small warhead, you can do a lot of damage. And it's that precision, that smartness, which is what makes these things really scary.
You also, you in the book, talk a little bit about, there are these larger drones like the Predator that you talk a lot about, but the larger drones, these are my words, not yours, they're, instead of being, quote, drones, they're really just remote-controlled aircraft. And when you're a remote-controlled aircraft, you start competing with a manned aircraft. And there's a culture in the military that's really interesting that you highlight, which is around the history and the legacy and sort of the almost romanticism of pilots and their virtue, and manned aircraft are just so deeply embedded in the history of military thinking that it hurt drones for a long time when you start thinking about them competing with manned aircraft. But the interesting thing about the small ones is no one confuses them with an F-35 or something like that. But would you mind talking about this kind of cultural issue drones have faced?
The cultural thing, we've seen it again and again, and sadly, particularly in the US, because the US has some of the richest history of drone developments. We've seen time and again, drones have been developed and then they've been shelved because they're competition. During the Second World War, not a lot of people know that the US Navy had its own attack drone unit, Stag 1. and they flew very successfully missions against the Japanese. It wasn't easy getting the unit together because one of the requirements for the aircraft was that they shouldn't take any materials away from building manned aircraft. So they ended up being made out of wood, and I believe some of the working of that was done by the Wurlitzer company, who make organs and things, just because they were very good at shaping wood. And at the end of the war, even though the drones had done reasonably, the technology was very primitive. You're talking these 70-pound monochrome television cameras with very low resolution, very difficult to see what the drone is seeing, but they were still able to hit targets. But at the end of the war, they decided, no, we don't really need drones. And all the surviving aircraft were rolled off the edge of an aircraft carrier and sunk. And we just went back to having manned aircraft. And again, something similar happened in the 60s with the QH-50 Dash, which was the drone anti-submarine helicopter, which was this terrific little helicopter which could be flown from Navy ships for submarine hunting. And it worked very well. Originally, it was only designed to carry out one flight. It was just designed to deliver a nuclear warhead. But they found they could fly it again and again, and it was brought into more and more missions and was more and more versatile. But it met its end because, unfortunately, the Navy wanted a new crewed helicopter, and they realized that if you're going to have a manned helicopter, what you don't want is to say why it's got a competition from a cheaper, more expendable little drone helicopter. So the QH-50 got ditched. And this happened time and again. And the only time what it took for drones to really get a foothold in the US military and stay there wasn't from the Air Force, it was from the CIA. And the original project, which turned into the Predator, was a CIA reconnaissance drone. And they flew that so successfully. And eventually the Air Force had the option of either they could join in and be part of that, or they could just let the CIA have its own Air Force. So eventually they joined in, and that became part of their kit. But what was interesting was that the Predator, which had just started out, it's basically a powered glider. It's a very wobbly, lightweight aircraft. And this wasn't the Air Force's idea of what a combat aircraft should look like at all. So they basically completely redesigned it and turned it into the Predator 2, which is the Reaper, which is several times bigger, several times faster, several times more powerful, and vastly more expensive. So it's something over $20 million a copy now. So instead of just having this little expendable drone that you can fly in and have a look at what's going on in the ground, you've now got this really expensive plane that it really gets quite embarrassing when you find out the Houthis have just shut down another one. So it's really not the Air Force's kind of thing. They don't like drones. But the small drones that they can't stop, that people can buy themselves, those are proliferating very fast. And it's interesting that those have come up very much from the ground routes, not from any military requirement, particularly in Ukraine, but also in other places as well.
You kind of touch on, there's a discussion in the book where you touch on when you use these drones for reconnaissance, that some of them are quieter than others. Like some of them will have maybe a combustion engine, or some of them have an electric engine. But sometimes it's actually desirable, you reference, to have a drone that makes a little more noise, because then whoever's being watched, it's harder to miss it, and you have this intimidating feeling of, I'm being watched by someone who might call in some kind of strike, or something bad could happen. Like there was actually, so you kind of just touch into the cultural anxiety around drones, kind of like the New Jersey thing, where there were all these unidentified drones, and what's going on, and who is it? Is it a foreign power? So there's a cultural anxiety if you're being watched by a drone, or just this mystery around drones. But do you want to elaborate a little bit around that?
Yeah, I mean, we don't really know what the whole psychological impact of drones is going to be going forward, but we do know it's likely to be huge. I mean, some of the the most unfortunate people underneath this are people living in Gaza, who are absolutely terrified of hearing drones going overhead because they're used to having IDF drones, and they are quite traumatized now just by the sound of that. But even in Iraq, as you say, the US Army had these little Raven reconnaissance drones, which can be heard from a distance. And they actually developed a couple of new sets of propeller blades for them, for the engines. There was one set which were the stealth rotors, which made it quieter, but they also developed a noisy set. And the idea of that is that you could fly that over the opposition, and then they would know there was a drone up there. So the idea is they would either shoot at it, which is great, because then you can see where they are, or they're going to run away, which is great, because you can see them moving. Or they're just going to take cover, which is great, because it means they can't shoot at your people or do anything threatening, and they're just there, so you've got them pinned down. So there are a lot of advantages to having noisy drones as well as really, really quiet, stealthy drones, and there's been a certain amount of work on both sides of that.
David, very interesting book. You know, one of the things that stood out to me in the book is that, one of the phrases out there is that manned aircraft have friends in high places, meaning, I guess, the Pentagon, and drones do not. And maybe if I can step back and say a couple of weeks ago, the F-47 was basically announced, right? And obviously that took a lot of people by surprise, but the way I understand it is that the F-47 is sort of this quarterback supersonic plane that's going to be basically accompanied by small drones. So it seems like maybe that phrase that they don't have friends in high places may not be the truth. Maybe talk about what you think about this, this plane. Does it surprise you? Just what is it, and how effective can it be? And does it surprise you that we actually awarded that contract to these guys?
It surprised me. I think it stunned a lot of people in the aviation field, because the Air Force they've been looking at the F-47 or the project which was to become the F-47 for 10 years now. So they've got a pretty good idea of the specification that they're after and what it's going to look like and what it's going to do. And this is the successor of aircraft to the F-22 Raptor, which is the fifth generation super cruise, stealthy, dogfighting, all bells and whistles combat aircraft, which it is absolutely the most powerful fighter aircraft in the skies at the moment. So that they wanted to build a next generation of that. And then last year, just when they were getting quite close to actually commissioning it, suddenly they got cold feet, because they were thinking, there's a problem here, because China is now getting long-range missiles, which means that they can probably hit our air bases. And China is getting much better air defense missiles and much better radar, which means that a stealth aircraft designed to operate over enemy lines is potentially very dangerous. We need to sit back and have a look at this. And they decided to defer the decision to the Trump administration, who caught absolutely everyone by surprise, because I think before you've got half the positions in the DoD are actually filled, suddenly they say, yes, we're going to go ahead with this. We're going to give Boeing the contract, and we're going to make F-47s. And you're right, it is it's going to be working in collaboration with these loyal wingmen drones, CCA they're called, Collaborative Combat Aircraft. And those are like little robot jets. And the idea is that they can go ahead and take some of the flak and do the really dangerous stuff. So the F-47 can stay further back. And that makes a huge amount of sense, because the F-47 is going to be a phenomenally expensive aircraft. They were one of the things that put the Air Force off was that people were talking about $300 million per plane. And you just know the way that procurement works. That's your starting estimate. It's only going to go up from there. So if they're quoting you 300 million when you come in through the door, by the time you've got engines and everything on it, it could be quite a lot more than that. And what you end up with is an aircraft that's a bit too expensive to risk. I mean, this was a problem with the F-22. Originally, they wanted 750 of them. The price kept going up until they ended up, and they cut the order, and they ended up with 187. So they ended up with a third of the number that the Air Force actually wanted. The risk is with the F-47. I think they want a couple of hundred of them. Once you start cutting that down when it gets expensive, it could very rapidly go down. And then you think, is it really worth having these? So I think it's a calculated risk. You need something in the interim. Nobody wants to trust AI to fly combat jets just yet. Nobody wants to let the robots off the leash, and that's except Elon Musk, of course. Elon Musk is wildly keen on this whole thing. He doesn't believe that manned aircraft have any future. And there's a lot of tech bro types like him who are now buzzing around the White House, who are trying to get their point of view heard. Interestingly, Elon Musk was away at the time that the F-47 was announced, so there are suspicions that that might have been engineered. So yeah, it's an interesting move. I would say this is almost certainly going to be the last generation of manned fighter jets. But at least it means the kids today do have something to aspire to, and just hope that because it's not going to be doing anything until the 2030s. But by the time they actually get to put that into the air, they're not facing anything that's robotized and even more capable coming at them from the other side. So we will see. I think it's a calculated risk. In a sense, it's the conservative approach, because let's just go with what we've always had. In another sense, it's very dangerous because we're in a changing world and you're putting an awful lot of money into a technology which is certainly going to be obsolete sooner or later.
Hey, David, I got a couple questions for you.
Yeah, fire away.
Loved your book. My first question is really on the title of the book. So in some ways, it could have been the history of drones, where they were, where they're headed. So really curious on how you chose or came up with the title for the book. And then my second question is, especially for our audience, I know for the book, a lot of the use cases were focused on military. But when you step back and think about the commercial and industrial applications, what are some of the ones you're hearing about that you think are like great applications for drone use? So yeah, that's questions I have.
Yeah. So the swarm thing, the big limitation with drones at the moment is the people, particularly for small drones, because at the moment you're very much on one operator per drone. On the big drones, it's even worse. On the big drones, you need several people looking after them. So ideally, what you have are autonomous drones, which fly themselves, and then moving beyond that, what you want are drones that work together in a cooperative, collaborative manner. So instead of having one operator per drone or one operator per several drones even, you've got one operator and a swarm. And the swarm is a single entity that the operator can then say, go over there and do that. So in fact, all the developments you look at basically tend towards swarm applications. So that's the end point, and where swarms are still perhaps a little way in the future, but not very far at all. But 10 years ago, I saw that as being the end point of where this lot is all evolving. Okay. In terms of use cases, there are lots of them. Now, we're already seeing on quite small scale local ones, drones used for surveying and looking at things like a building site. You can have a drone fly over it and create a 3D model of it, so you can see exactly what's being built and how it's changed since yesterday, and anything like that. Delivery drones it's interesting that people like Amazon and Google were flying delivery drones when I wrote the book 10 years ago, and they are still waiting for regulatory approval, because you still can't just fly drones everywhere and drop packages on people's doorsteps. There's a load of test projects going underway to do that. But as with driverless cars, though actually driverless cars are actually a lot harder to make work. But as with driverless cars, the technology is a bit ahead of society and where we're willing to go. Ultimately, there is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't have low-cost delivery drones dropping your Amazon parcel on your doormat, putting your pizza on your doormat, delivering absolutely anything, because there's no reason why you can't have low-cost delivery drones with exactly the same precision that we see with military drones. One of the interesting things about the conflict in Ukraine is that nobody else has drone delivery services. The only people who do are the soldiers on the front lines there.
Oh, wow.
I actually did a piece looking at one drone payload, and basically you can stick your rations for one day in these attack drones, which normally they deliver about a 4-pound explosive charge. Instead, you just pack it with food and medical supplies, and you can fly that off to the people you want to deliver to, and you can put it in the room with them. And the reason why they need those is because enemy drones make it impossible to drive a vehicle there. But there are actually working drone delivery services on the front line. So there's no reason why anyone else shouldn't have those.
I guess follow up on there with the regulations, because I view that similar. I think the regulations might be holding back the technology. Have you been tracking that, like FAA regulations?
Yeah, and
are they making progress as it kind of open up, or what's the holdup?
So at the moment, they're granting a very few licenses. The big thing that everyone wants is beyond line of sight, BLOS, which means that you can, because at the moment you can only fly a drone where the operator can actually see it, and that means just limited to 1 or 2 miles absolute tops, and that's not what everyone wants. What everyone wants for agricultural drones and for things like pipeline inspection drones, and for power line inspection drones, and for a lot of industrial infrastructure, they want to be able to just get this drone, okay, go off, fly 100 miles down that pipeline, take pictures of the entire thing in detail, zoom in where there's anything that looks like it might be a problem, and bring it back. And you can't do that because the FAA won't let you do that, because you can't fly beyond line of sight. They've granted a very few licenses for those, but they are being very cautious, very conservative. Similarly, I think Amazon there's like a couple of towns where they've got some pilot delivery programs going, and those seem to be going fine. But every year I look at it and it just hasn't really changed very much. So that's just painfully slow in terms of what people are allowed to do. The technology is there, and there's a lot of very interesting technology around, particularly as AI gets better. These drones can do more smarter things, like, as I say, flying around electrical infrastructure, looking for hotspots, find a hotspot, zoom in on it, what's causing the problem there. And they can do all these kind of things that previously took a whole crew of people and cherry pickers or other machinery to clamber up and go and get a close look. And now you can just do it with a drone, or you could if you were allowed to. So there's certainly lots of applications out there, but it's slow in coming.
One question for you, David, just a simple one. If you're the FAA and you're looking at this, I understand we don't want, flying vehicles everywhere that could collide with aircraft or gosh knows what could happen. But is there not if you were in charge of the FAA, is there a simple way to maybe initiate regulatory reform here so that we could get all these drones into action? It sounds so promising.
Now, at the other end of this, you've got the great American public. And what do they think of having drones flying overhead, delivery drones flying down the street, drones spying on them? Anytime you fly a drone, people immediately think it's spying on them. People immediately think it's up to no good. You have lots of cases where people have shot down or tried to shoot down drones which were flying over their land. I think you're facing quite a lot of public resistance to that. So I suspect that's where it's coming from. Some of it may simply be a matter of education, but I think some of it you're going to be facing a lot of resistance, and everyone will say, yeah, well, what happens? An Amazon drone just delivering a phone is fine, but what about one carrying a 20-pound box of something? What happens if that crashes? And it's then very, very difficult to prove that it's safe and to convince people that it is safe. So obviously, regulators tend to be very conservative and not move too quick, because the last thing they want is a major accident and disaster, and this child got killed because of your drone regulations.
But things like that all makes sense, of course. But things like pipeline inspection, or there's so many uses before you could have these things flying in your neighborhood, potentially, dropping a box on somebody. Is there any place around the planet that, for whatever reason, has some advanced approach to, like a Dubai or someplace like that, where they're embracing it and it's happening? Any test cases out there that you'd show us?
Slowly. There's no good test cases yet. I mean, Dubai is an interesting one because, yes, they have been the first ones to sign up for particularly the thing that we all love, which is flying taxi drones. So it's just like a giant quadcopter drone that will take passengers around the place. And it's short-range urban transportation. There's several companies that have developed them. Obviously, getting those approved is very slow, but Dubai has said they're going to have them flying, I think, in about 2027, and everyone else will be watching to see how that goes. But there are just a few places, so it's interesting that it really does take a war zone for people to say, right, we're going to do what we like with this technology, and because we need to get a load of food to these guys over here, we're going to fly it.
What would you say, just for fun, is the most incredible application of a drone you've seen? Because you've seen them used for so many different potential cases, but what's an outside the box, blow our minds application of a drone?
I mean, on the sort of the far end of fantasy, things like Harvard's robo-bees, which are literally robot bees, which is a kind of wacky approach to, we have this problem that we're losing all our pollinators. A lot of insects are dying off. So we're going to build a robot bee, which is able to do the job. And they're quite serious about it. And they're facing a lot of technical challenges, but you really have got this tiny little bee-sized robot that can just go from flower to flower. Battery life is a big issue with that, but that's being done. But I mean, people are just finding wacky uses for consumer drones. Like the one that I loved, there was one science research project that was they are investigating whales, and what they were doing, they wanted to get a sample of the exhaust from a whale's blowhole. When whales surface and blow out water. So they were flying quadcopters over them and then taking samples of what the whale was blowing out. So, and that gave them an insight as to what was going on inside the whales. And there's lots of there's things like reseeding projects using drones to plant seeds and for reforestation. And I think some of the photogrammetry ones are interesting, which is where you're using photography to make a 3D model of something. There's a nice Israeli one, which is it's a drone in a box solution. So there's no human operator. You just have this drone that sits in a box. And this is at an industrial site where they are mining, I think, phosphate and other materials. And every day the drone flies out of its box, flies around all the stockpiles of material, photographs them, then calculates exactly how much material there is in them. And then it generates a report saying, so you have 25,000 tons of phosphate in this one, 27,000 tons in this one. And it just automatically does that. Before, they had to have they had to shut the site down for an hour and had a guy, a couple of surveyors walking over the stockpiles and taking pictures and working it out. Now, the machine just does it all automatically without any human intervention.
Sometimes, David, you see these videos of some of the ways the Chinese in particular seem to be using drones. I don't know if this is an accurate reflection of maybe how advanced some of the thinking is there, but there's drones that are part of electric vehicles that are like on the top of the vehicle, and then you can release the drone and it can look over the hill. Or there's firefighting, the drone holding the hose and putting out a fire. This just are the Chinese as advanced in drones as the popular press might make us think they are?
The Chinese are very, very advanced in drones. The biggest drone company in the world is Daijing Innovations, based in Shenzhen in China. And that one company has about 70% of the global market for consumer drones, maybe a bit more. They are hugely advanced. They are constantly looking at new applications, new areas that they can expand into for industrial and agricultural applications and consumer applications. They want everyone to have a drone. So yes, the Chinese are very much at the leading edge of this, and they arguably produce the best drones at the lowest cost in the world. Sadly, the American consumer drone market was pretty much wiped out by the Chinese because they couldn't compete with this giant with low prices. So all the US drone makers, people like Teal and Skydio, are now making drones for the government. So they're still producing drones, but they can't make them. They can't make small, cheap ones. They've got to make bigger, more expensive ones that the Pentagon can afford.
Well, David, we have a new solution for everything here. We're just going to some more tariffs. It's time for some tariffs.
It has recently, people have been arguing that this is a huge opportunity for the US drone industry. We'll just have to see how long the tariffs stay in. But also, people and in the US are worried about DJI drones as a security threat. In particular, the US government, before, if you were a government department and you just wanted a drone to, do some survey work, take some pictures of land, you'd probably use a DJI drone for that. Now, nobody is allowed to fly DJI drones because the company is in a close relationship with the Chinese government, and there are concerns that they could pass information from the drones to the Chinese government. So there are definite worries that the Chinese drones may be spying on us.
So if we were talking about the regulatory reform potentially in drones, and you might get all those great applications, but if you were looking to drive innovation and also just domestic production of drones, wouldn't one of the ways to do it be to allow for their use, to change the regulatory, surroundings of the whole thing, and that would get more people thinking about making them and using them in new applications? I'm saying if you want to address the defense point you just said, it seems like regulatory reform would be an important way to do it.
Yes, I think regulatory reform is certainly needed, and that's I would hope that's something that the new administration will look at very seriously, because they're quite keen on reform in other areas, and I think they might very much want to update that if they can overcome this public fear and public concern about drones and what they're being used for. Because as you point out, in New Jersey recently, and in other places as well, there have been whole waves of drone sightings, and where people believe, rightly or wrongly, that there are lots of drones that are around for nefarious purposes, and they report everything they see flying in the sky as a drone, and it creates these huge panics. Because in the case of the New Jersey one, the investigations failed to turn up any actual evidence of drones around. In other cases, there have actually been waves of mysterious drones. For example, flying over US nuclear power stations. We've found instances where there have been dozens of drones for no obvious reason appear to have been staking out what's going on in nuclear power stations in particular. And that's a big problem, because another aspect of the regulations over there is that even if you're in a nuclear power station and you've got a large drone hovering overhead, you can't do anything about it. You are not allowed to shoot it down, because the FAA says that interfering with an aircraft in flight, and drones are still aircraft in flight, is something that you get up to 20 years punishment for. So virtually nobody has the legal power to bring down drones.
Boy, that's a striking one as well. Let me ask you one more, and then Mike and Robbie jump back in here. So in the book, you get the impression there's so many different companies that you reference that have some sort of drone-like device, and sometimes it feels like five guys in a garage, and sometimes it's a really big company like Textron, or it's all these different companies. And then you also reference the Israelis have one, and of course we haven't even talked about the Chinese. So you get this impression of this big industry with lots and lots and lots of little manufacturers. Is that the way it still looks today? I mean, you mentioned the big Chinese company. Is it a craft industry, or what would you tell us about the shape of it and how it might change?
The fantastic thing about the drone industry is that it has incredibly low barriers to entry. You can, and again, this is one of the fascinating lessons from Ukraine. The Ukrainian government has a thing called the Victory Drones program, and that it explains to people, here's a list of the components that you need to buy online. Here's the tools you need, which is a screwdriver and a soldering iron. Here's how you turn $400 of components into a military FPV drone that we can use. And here's the full set of instructions how to do it. And they run these online courses, and they've got thousands of people who are literally assembling drones from commercial parts at their kitchen tables. Those are then sent off, go through a quality check process, and are then flown against the Russians. So it is something that can literally be done by one person.
Is the way they're doing, is that like, hey, if you want to help, here's how to build a drone, please build one and bring it to this drop-off location? That's the program?
Yep.
Wow.
That's exactly it. Yep. Victory Drones. And we don't know what proportion of Ukrainian drones are made that way, but certainly they are making an awful lot of drones, and one of those drones can take out a tank. So this is so in one sense, the fact people can build a military grade weapon at their kitchen table using bits they've just bought off the internet for a few $100s is quite transformational. And the other thing is, as well as building it, obviously this makes it very easy for people who want to experiment and try their own designs and see if they can modify it. So there's a joke in Ukraine that everybody has their own drone company. Because anyone can do this, and anyone can one of the recent innovations was this idea of fiber optic drones. So instead of having radio communications, you have your drone trailing out a fiber optic cable, and that makes it completely immune to electronic warfare and radio jamming, and also makes it impossible to detect from radio emissions because it doesn't have any. And I talked to an American guy who'd seen about this, and he literally experimented in his garage, worked out a design that worked, and took it to Ukraine and showed the Ukrainians how to build it. And he reckoned he could do that with $200 worth of parts. He could convert any drone into a fiber optic drone, which could beat any electronic warfare. And you've got lots of people who are doing that kind of thing. The one I love are Dragon drones, which look spectacular. It's a drone fitted with a thermite canister, which just sprays out liquid metal. And thermite's not very useful on the ground, but when you put it in a drone like that, you can fly it around and start fires all over the place. So in the fall season in Ukraine, when everything was dry, they were just creating fantastic fires along the tree lines that the Russians were occupying. All sorts of things that anyone can experiment with on their own. There are very low barriers to entry. On the other hand, you've also got the big people like DJI who are working with top-level electronics and thinking, what can we do with AI to make this more capable? And what new features can we add into this? So there's a lot happening at every level.
Well, I think if I didn't mention AI, we would probably lose a lot of subscribers. So I'm going to go ahead and go down that path. It was really interesting in the book. You talked about there was this 2008 study that said that drone operators have more fatigue, more exhaustion than basically, pilots out in the combat zone. I thought that was really interesting, and so it leads me to believe that over time that we have operators of these drones, Are we now at the point where AI has taken over that role? Is that going to be something that happens in the next 12, 18 months, or is it something that's 5 or 6 years? Where is AI as it relates to drones? And do we need to see sort of regulatory reform and stuff like that before AI really becomes a big part of this?
So the answer is yes. There are currently drones that are capable of flying themselves, and in Ukraine, there's an AI company called Seika which did develop drones. Originally, their aim was to get an AI which could recognize camouflaged armored vehicles better than a human, and they did that. And they then flew drones with that and thought, well, if it can see it, we could just have it drop a bomb on it. So they've now actually got totally autonomous attack drones out there. They don't use them at scale yet, but that technology is certainly there. There is a huge amount of concern about autonomous lethal drones, and there's a lot of regulatory issues. The Pentagon has very, very strict rules about autonomous lethal weapons. The Pentagon is also relatively slow about introducing AI into its other drones, like the Reapers. A Reaper crew, you will have one pilot and one payload operator, and they'll be working like an 8-hour shift. But because the aircraft flies for more than 8 hours, they will go off shift, and new crew will go on shift and keep flying the drone. So you can actually have 8 or 10 people involved just in keeping that one aircraft in the air. So yeah, there's a real need for AI there. The regulations are likely to lag behind. It's like with passenger aircraft. The autopilot is really good. You can have an autopilot which will take off, fly you to a destination and land. How comfortable are you about being in an aircraft being flown by a machine with no human pilot? That's interestingly, they're talking about now removing the co-pilot position. So, because all passenger aircraft currently have to have a pilot and co-pilot. They're talking about removing the co-pilot. They're not talking about removing the pilot yet. But maybe in 10 years' time, we'll see. But again, I think there will be a lot of public resistance to that. And if people are scared of having drones flying around, the idea of having totally autonomous drones flying around governed by AI, I think is going to scare them a lot more. So I think that may be quite an extended argument.
Hey, David, in some ways, your book is covering the drone conversation, but in other ways, I think it might be foreshadowing a bigger conversation around robotics in general, around AI, physical AI. What are some of the lessons learned that might apply more broadly to robotics? I think you'd mentioned regulatory and engagement with the community to accelerate adoption. What are the things we can learn in other areas of autonomy?
I think a lot of it is this idea that when you've got a low-cost technology where you're using a lot of off-the-shelf components, and there's a lot of AI systems that are just using things like Raspberry Pi processors, which is like a little $100 processor, which you can do enormously capable things in terms of pattern recognition. It means you've got something that you can develop a whole user community, and you can have an open source ecosystem. Now, that means there's all kinds of devices in what's now more widely called the Internet of Things, because there's no reason why anything couldn't have a sensor and an internet communication on it and intelligence to make it better. And that can be all sorts of things from medical monitoring devices to your fridge. There's all these things can have intelligence built into them. And it's just a matter of the imagination and people spotting killer applications, things where it's really worthwhile having it. Because for years and years, people have been talking about smart houses and doing all these magical things with turning the heating and the lights on and off without having to have wall switches. Nobody wants that because it's just a gimmick. Whereas something like a medical device, which will warn someone if you've fallen over because it's able to detect the patterns associated with that is actually quite valuable, and everybody wants that. Everybody wants a smart burglar system that isn't going to be set off by a bird landing in the garden. People want things that are capable. And now we've got the technology to do that. It's just a matter of everyone having the imagination to do that, as they have done with drones, to find new and creative ways of using them. If you can find ways of doing things that people will appreciate, even if they didn't know it was what they wanted, then I think you can create whole new markets just out of using what we've got already.
One thing, David, I'm curious, because you've obviously spent a lot of time thinking about China, Chinese industry, the Chinese strategies around all this. One of the biggest macro factors that plays out over the decades to come is the way China's population is decreasing. And I'm curious if you think strategically that the Chinese government, one of their interests in autonomy and robotics and drones and all of these things, it somehow has to do with, we're going to have to do more with fewer people. Like, it's just a fundamental equation of Chinese society. Do you think there is the Chinese passion for all these things, do you think it is linked to their shrinking population?
I think there is a huge awareness of this and the long-term impact of the one-child policy. And I mean, there's sort of a foreshadowing of this in Japan, which has a more imminent demographic crisis, where you've got a lot of older people and not so many younger people to look after them. And there we have seen a huge industry in consumer devices which will help look after older people and make life viable for that. So yes, I think in China there is a great awareness. There's also, there is a great awareness of how they want their economy to look. And that will certainly involve more automation and more robotics. At the moment, obviously the one that fascinates everyone are humanoid robots that can literally step into a human's shoes and do the job that humans can do. The hardware is interesting, but what really, really matters for that is the software and AI. Because just getting a robot hand that can pick up a cup, the mechanics of that are very simple. Control system behind that, the software, so it can actually judge how heavy the cup is and not move it so fast that it's going to spill it. That's the kind of learned thing that has defeated people for many decades, but which is now something that can be tackled with things like machine learning. So that sort of technology will transform, I think, things like humanoid robots from being amusing toys into, this is something that we could actually have sitting in a factory doing something that previously took a human worker. And I think nobody is more aware of that than the Chinese, because they have this vast AI project coupled with vast robotics capability. So yes, I think we will see that, and that will very much, if that works out the way they'd like it to, that will very much solve a lot of their problems in terms of the human capacity they have going forward.
David, along those lines, what can the U.S. companies, U.S. government do to keep a competitive edge in this race towards, AI, general intelligence, whatnot? What are some of your thoughts? Because I think about the drone industry and how we lost it, let's say, to DJI, at least for the commercial space. And so what are some of the lessons learned from that experience that we can adopt? Is it like new regulations or not new regulations, but removing some of those barriers in areas to foster innovators and whatnot?
I think part of it is because China has the industrial infrastructure it has a vast number of engineers, and particularly in high-tech sectors. I'm sure you've heard the same conversation as I have about the US and can it onshore its things like mobile phone production. And the simple answer is that at the moment, no, it can't, because we simply don't have enough trained people to do the kinds of things that are being done. So I suspect that is going to take more than short-term market forces to rectify. I think you could look at the kind of things that are being done in other countries, but certainly fostering and encouraging education and producing a trained workforce, and then creating the incentives so that people who do create viable products don't face regulatory hurdles and can get them out and make profits and export them effectively. I think there's a certain amount of work that can be done. However, that said, I'm a drone person. This kind of macroeconomic stuff is well above my pay grade.
Well, look, David, this has been awesome. Again, Rob West, I'm sure will listen to this or watch it, and so we owe him a gratitude for finding you. We're always trying to think about 10 years out, David, just in terms of like how the world looks, what energy it needs, who's supplying it, what methods, what countries are doing better or worse, all those questions. As you think about 10 years out in the drone world, which seems like an eternity, honestly, for how many developments can happen. You've referenced China being highly competitive. That's clearly on our radar. You've referenced sort of society kind of getting in the way, honestly, or restricting some of these developments. But what else is on your radar 10 years out that we might be talking about? If we were doing this show 10 years from now, where probably the three of us are robots, what do you think we might be talking about, or what might be the issues, or what might be the key features of that drone landscape 10 years out?
I would hope that a lot of the things that we have the technology for at the moment, but can't achieve due to other factors, things like drone deliveries, will have just become everyday things. I would hope that the full potential of AI has meant that the AI, and by means of its robotic extension, so things like humanoid robots, are trivially common and everyone just accepts that it's going to be a robot packing your groceries or delivering them and things like that. I would like to see a world of plenty, essentially, in which humans have been freed up from doing a lot of these things, and really, really smart machines are doing them much better than we ever could. And we can sit back with our feet up and think about the more strategic issues. So I would like to think that this is a liberating technology. But I'm also very aware, particularly as we see what's been happening in other places, and the fact that because anyone can build drones, there is also a lot of threat there. So I would like to think that if there are lots of drones in the skies above us, they are all friendly ones, and we don't have to look up nervously and wonder whether that is a terrorist drone that's about to destroy our local power station. But I think that issue may still be very much with us in 10 years' time, and perhaps a lot sharper than it is now.
David, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time, and we'd love to visit with you more in the future, but just a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope that was helpful.
No, it was tremendous. Thank you, everybody.